thing covering their skin. No cloth, no hide, no wrapping of any kind. It's easy to picture that as a primitive state, but it was actually the product of an extraordinary evolutionary bargain. Early humans had already given up something most mammals rely on for survival, a thick coat of fur. In exchange, they gained a body built for endurance, for covering long distances under a blazing sun without overheating. That bargain worked beautifully in the heat of equatorial Africa. It would not work everywhere else on the planet, and that mismatch is where our story really begins. 2. To understand why humans went bare-skinned in the first place, you have to look at what they were doing with their bodies. Many researchers believe early Homo sapiens and their immediate ancestors were persistence hunters, chasing prey animals for hours until the animals collapsed from heat exhaustion while the humans kept going. A hairy body traps heat during that kind of exertion. So over time, natural selection favored humans with less hair and more sweat glands, of which humans have far more than almost any other mammal. Compare a human to a chimpanzee, our close genetic cousin. The chimp is covered in hair from head to toe, while the human is nearly naked, with sweat glands dotting nearly every inch of skin. That difference wasn't an accident, it was a hunting adaptation, and it came at a real cost, the moment the sun went down or the temperature dropped. 3. Picture a small family group at dusk on the savannah, the heat of the day finally breaking, and with it, the comfort of bare skin disappearing too. Without fur, without fire, without shelter, the drop in temperature after sunset could be dangerous. Early humans likely huddled together for warmth, used what little vegetation was available, and stayed close to embers of a fire when they had one. This nightly vulnerability was manageable in Africa, where temperatures rarely fell to truly lethal levels, but it was a preview of a much bigger problem waiting on the horizon, one that would confront any human group bold enough or desperate enough to wander beyond the tropics. 4. And wander they did. Sometime after 200,000 years ago, groups of Homo sapiens began pushing out of Africa, following coastlines, river valleys, and grasslands into the Near East, then into Europe and Asia. Genetic and archaeological evidence traces these migrations in remarkable detail, showing pulses of movement northward over tens of thousands of years. Each step north meant colder nights, harsher winters, and less forgiving landscapes. A body evolved for the equator was walking directly into Ice Age climates, and it had absolutely no biological answer for that problem. The answer, when it came, would not evolve in the body. It would be invented. 5. Imagine the shock of that first encounter with a true Ice Age winter. Wind that cuts through skin like a blade. Ground so cold it burns bare feet. Nights where temperatures plunge far below anything experienced in Africa. Without protection, hypothermia can kill an unclothed human in a matter of hours, even faster in wind or wet conditions. Yet all around these early migrants, other animals were thriving in that same brutal cold. Mammoths, woolly rhinos, reindeer, bears, all wrapped in dense, insulating fur that let them shrug off blizzards. The solution to the human problem was walking around on 4 legs, wearing exactly the coat our ancestors needed. 6. So the strategy became obvious, even if the execution took real ingenuity. Borrow it. Animals had spent millions of years perfecting fur, fat layers, and hide as insulation against exactly the kind of cold humans were now facing. Rather than waiting for evolution to catch up, which could take hundreds of thousands of years, early humans took a shortcut. They hunted the animals already equipped to survive the cold, and they began repurposing that animal's evolutionary advantage for themselves. It was, in a sense, one of the first examples of humans outsourcing a biological problem to technology and ingenuity instead of waiting on their own bodies to adapt. 7. That repurposing started small. Stone tool users had long since learned to make sharp flakes for cutting meat, and it wasn't a huge leap to realize. Those same flakes could scrape fat and tissue from the underside of a hide, turning a slippery, rotting animal skin into something that could be dried, softened, and worn. Early hide working was almost certainly crude at first. A rectangle of fur draped over the shoulders, tied loosely with a strip of sinew or plant fiber, offering basic protection from wind and cold. It wouldn't have looked like clothing in the modern sense, more like a blanket worn on the body, but it was the first spark of an idea that would eventually clothe every human on Earth. 8. Here is where the story takes one of its strangest and most delightful turns, because some of the best evidence for ancient clothing doesn't come from fabric or hides at all, since those decompose long before archaeologists can find them. It comes from lice. Human head lice and human body lice are closely related, but genetically distinct. And body lice have one very specific requirement. They can only live and lay their eggs in clothing, not directly on human skin. By comparing the DNA of these two louse populations, geneticists can estimate when they diverged into separate species, and multiple independent studies place that split at somewhere around 170,000 years ago. 9. What makes this clue so powerful is the logic behind it. Body lice didn't invent themselves out of nowhere. They evolved to exploit a brand new ecological niche that hadn't existed before: the folds and fibers of worn clothing. That means the clothing had to exist first, giving lice something to adapt to. So when scientists date the split between head lice and body lice, they're indirectly dating the presence of clothing itself. It's a bit like reading history backward, through the genome of a parasite, a strange, almost accidental record left by tiny hitchhikers who cared far more about clothing than any human record keeper ever could have imagined. 10. That genetic estimate lines up strikingly well with an independent line of evidence: the archaeological record of tools. Around the same broad era, roughly 100,000 years ago and continuing forward, researchers begin finding bone tools at sites across Africa and the Near East that look nothing like tools for butchering meat or working stone. Their shape, their wear patterns, and their polish all point to a very specific job: working soft, pliable material like leather. This is exactly what you'd expect to find if clothing production were becoming a regular, important part of daily survival rather than an occasional improvisation. 11, and chief among these tools, is the humble awl, a pointed implement made from bone, ivory, or antler, designed to punch holes through tough hide. An awl lets you pierce material that would otherwise be nearly impossible to penetrate with bare hands or a simple blade. And once you can punch consistent holes, you can start lacing pieces of hide together with sinew or cord. Sites in Africa dating back roughly 75,000 years and beyond have produced these bone awls in significant numbers, suggesting that hide working wasn't a rare, isolated skill, but something practiced widely and passed down across generations of toolmakers. 12. The story deepens dramatically at a place called Denisova Cave, tucked into the Altai Mountains of Siberia. This single cave has produced some of the most remarkable finds in all of human prehistory, including the genetic evidence of an entirely separate human lineage, the Denisovans. But alongside those discoveries, archaeologists working through the cave's ancient layers uncovered something deceptively simple: needles carved from bone and mammoth ivory, dated to roughly 50,000 years old, among the oldest needles ever found anywhere on Earth. Their presence in such a remote, frigid location is itself a clue about just how essential proper clothing had become for surviving there. 13. Why does a needle matter so much more than an awl? Because an awl only lets you pierce a hole and thread something through it loosely. A needle with a drilled or carved eye lets you carry thread through material in a continuous, controlled stitch, the same basic mechanism used in sewing machines today. That distinction separates a rough hide draped over the body from a garment that is actually tailored, shaped to the contours of arms, legs, and torso, closed at the seams to keep wind and cold from sneaking through. The eyed needle wasn't just a better tool, it represented an entirely new category of technology: true, fitted clothing. 14. Once tailoring became possible, the whole equation of survival changed. A loose wrap of hide, however thick, is full of gaps. At the neck, under the arms, around the legs, everywhere cold air can slip in and body heat can slip out. A fitted garment closes those gaps. Sleeves keep arms warm. Leggings keep legs warm. Layers can be stacked, each trapping a pocket of warm air against the skin. Some archaeologists estimate that well-made, layered, sewn clothing could have made the difference of many additional degrees of effective warmth compared to a simple draped hide. Quite possibly the difference between surviving an Ice Age winter and not surviving it at all. 15. This technological leap may have had consequences far beyond individual comfort. For hundreds of thousands of years, Neanderthals lived successfully across Ice Age Europe, clearly a resilient and capable population in their own right. Yet the archaeological record from Neanderthal sites shows comparatively little evidence of specialized sewing tools like eyed needles, and comparatively more evidence of simpler hide-scraping tools. Some researchers have proposed that this technological gap, however narrow it might seem, may have given incoming Homo sapiens populations a real edge in the coldest, harshest environments, allowing them to thrive in conditions that pushed Neanderthal groups to their absolute limit. 16. It's worth being careful here, because this is genuinely debated territory in paleoanthropology, not a settled fact. Neanderthals were resourceful, intelligent, and clearly capable of surviving brutal winters, using draped hides, fire, shelter, and shared body heat. Homo sapiens may not have been smarter or more capable in any general sense. But if sewn, multi-layered clothing gave one population even a modest advantage in retaining body heat during the worst cold snaps, that kind of marginal advantage, repeated across thousands of winters and thousands of generations, is exactly the sort of quiet factor that can tip the balance of who expands into new territory and who struggles to hold on to it. 17. Clothing, however, only solved part of the problem, because it left something rather important exposed the whole time: the feet. Walking barefoot across frozen tundra is a fast route to frostbite. Walking barefoot across sharp volcanic rock, thorny scrubland or icy river crossings invites cuts, bruises, and infections that, in a world without antibiotics, could easily become life-threatening. If clothing protected the torso and limbs from cold, something else needed to protect the part of the body making direct, constant contact with the harshest terrain on Earth. That something would turn out to be one of the cleverest and most quietly ingenious inventions in the entire human story. 18. The evidence for early footwear is even more indirect, and, in its own way, even more impressive than the lice or the needles, because it comes from the shape of human bones themselves. Anthropologists studying the skeletal remains of ancient humans noticed a curious pattern in the toe bones. Bare feet that spend their whole lives gripping uneven, unpredictable ground develop thick, robust, curved toe bones built for constant flexing and gripping. But starting around 40,000 years ago in certain populations, those toe bones begin appearing noticeably thinner and less robust, a shift that shows up clearly when comparing skeletons across different time periods and regions. 19. Weaker, less curved toe bones are exactly what you'd expect if something other than the toes themselves were doing the work of gripping and stabilizing the foot on rough ground. And the leading explanation is straightforward: footwear. Once a rigid or semi-rigid sole starts distributing pressure and providing traction, the toes no longer need to grip the earth directly with the same force, and over enough generations that reduced demand shows up as a genuine skeletal change. It's a beautiful example of how a purely cultural invention, a piece of technology with no biological component at all, can leave a permanent fingerprint on the human body itself. 20. So what did those earliest shoes actually look like? Almost certainly nothing like a modern shoe or boot. The most likely candidate is something closer to a simple moccasin, a single piece of hide roughly cut to the shape of the foot, wrapped up and around, then gathered and tied at the ankle with a cord of sinew or plant fiber. No sole in the modern sense, no rigid structure, just a flexible pouch of leather providing a barrier between skin and ground. Simple as it sounds, that singular piece of rapid hide would have made an enormous difference on frozen ground, sharp gravel, or thorny brush, turning previously impassable terrain into something a person could cross safely. 21. We don't have to rely purely on bones and lice for evidence of early footwear, because in one remarkable case, we have the real object itself. In 1991, hikers in the Ötzi Alps stumbled across the frozen body of a man who had died there more than 5,000 years ago, a discovery that would come to be known as Ötzi the Iceman. Preserved almost perfectly by ice and snow, Ötzi's body came with an extraordinary bonus. Much of his clothing and equipment survived intact, including a pair of shoes that gave researchers an almost unheard of window into prehistoric footwear technology. 22. Ötzi's shoes turned out to be a small masterpiece of practical engineering. The outer sole was made from tough, weather-resistant bearskin, chosen specifically for its durability and its ability to shed moisture. The upper portion, wrapping around the top of the foot, was made from softer, more breathable deerskin, flexible enough to move naturally with each step. Inside, researchers found a surprising and clever detail: a layer of soft grass, woven into a kind of netting and stuffed into the shoe, functioning almost exactly like a modern wool sock, trapping warm air and wicking moisture away from the skin. This was not a crude wrapping. It was a considered, multi-material design solving several problems at once. 23. From that early moccasin and grass template, footwear diversified rapidly as humans spread into every imaginable climate. In warm, dry regions, simple sandals made of woven plant fiber or leather straps offered protection from hot ground and rocky trails, while letting the foot breathe. In the Arctic, footwear evolved in the opposite direction, becoming thick, fur-lined boots capable of trapping heat against skin in temperatures far below freezing. Across parts of Asia, woven grass and straw shoes became common, lightweight and surprisingly effective at insulating against cold, wet ground. In every case, the underlying idea stayed the same: take local materials and use them to solve the specific challenge of the local terrain and climate. 24. It's worth pausing to appreciate the through line connecting all of this to the present day. Every pair of sneakers laced up for a morning run, every leather boot worn on a construction site, every sandal slipped on for a walk along the beach, all of it descends technologically and conceptually from that first strip of hide wrapped clumsily around a cold, aching foot on some ice age tundra tens of thousands of years ago. The materials have changed almost beyond recognition, moving from raw hide to rubber, synthetic foam, and woven textile. But the basic problem being solved, protecting the human foot from a hostile world, has never really changed at all. 25. Clothing and footwear did more than simply keep individual humans warm and safe, though that alone would have been remarkable enough. Together, they functioned as a kind of portable climate, a technology that let the human body carry its own personal version of the African savanna wherever it went, whether that was the Siberian steppe, the peaks of the Alps, or the Arctic coastline. Without fur, without natural insulation, without any biological answer to extreme cold, humans invented one instead, stitched together from borrowed hides, sharpened bone, and patient ingenuity. That invention didn't just keep our ancestors alive through countless brutal winters. It opened the door to nearly every environment on the planet and let our species walk, quite literally, anywhere it chose to go.